Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for attendance and being here. I see some faces from yesterday, and I see some faces from last year, and then some new faces as well. So just a quick introduction and what really led to the kind of the formation of this talk and this teaching. So my name is Brian Sanderoff. I'm a traditionally trained pharmacist, and I practice holistic pharmacy. And this is my partner, Randy Botnick, who's a clinical hypnotherapist and a counselor. And we have a center, a wellness center in Baltimore, outside of Baltimore, in a town called Hunt Valley. And so we have our holistic pharmacy, we have our offices where we see our individual patients, and we have a whole bunch of other practitioners there as well. And one time, first of all, our mission is really to help people understand the ramifications of their decisions and to learn to make different choices about things, thus having different health. And ultimately, we want to help people get to this maybe slightly elusive idea of optimal health. In medicine, we're not very good at that. In medicine, if we took a continuum of health where 10 was optimal health and 0 was the complete absence of health, also known as death, we all kind of operate at 5. And if we get sick and we get involved in the medical system, what they do is try to return us back to 5. But no one really helps us get from 5 to 10 to that optimal health. And so our goal, I think, in a lot of our work is to really help people understand those concepts and to start to move that way down the continuum. So one of the things that Randy and I were discussing one day as we were talking about our patients and sometimes our frustrations in people making their choices was really helping people understand what their priorities are and helping to change those priorities if possible. And the raw truth of it is I sit down with patients and I say, hey, what's going on? And they tell me their problems with their health and that they want to see those change. And they tell me that health is their first priority. But when we start to examine what their behaviors are and what their choices are, we find out that health really isn't their first or second or even their third priority. It's their work, it's family, it's a million other things. And so we sort of had this light bulb go off and sort of came up with this concept of asking that really simple question. Sometimes it can be a little bit of a challenge to the patients that we're working with as well, to sort of challenge them and say, okay, well, if health really was your first priority, what could you do differently right now? And that's sort of what came behind this class and this way of sort of looking at health. One thing that Randy passed out was a little flyer about a holistic health class that we have, and I would encourage you guys to consider signing up for that. That's a really good first step in starting to make different choices. So I talked a little bit about this yesterday as well, but for people that are new here, today, just real quickly, this is a free online class, and it comes in the form of emails that will come to you once a week on a Sunday, and that will lay out some tasks or some things to do for the following week. And they're simple 5 to 10 minute practices and/or teachings that each week will be built on the foundations of the week before, and by the end of the 12-week class, you'll be a different person. And I kind of think of that as Holistic Health 101, really simple, basic things. But I also find that even when I'm dealing with people that are practitioners in the health world or people that are really, elite athletes or 2-hour-a-day meditators, that lots of times we forget the basics. Sports analogy in spring training, what's the first thing that every baseball team works on? The fundamentals, how to properly pick up a ground ball and how to bunt, even though they may be great athletes. And so I think it's helpful, even if we think that we're like this far along on that path, to come back to the basics and remember those things again. And so that class is a good way to start, and again, absolutely free, simple, easy, and I would encourage you to sign up and get your friends to sign up as well. We'll be starting it in about 2 weeks, although it starts anytime you want. So if someone signed up 4 weeks from now, they would get that first email and then the second email once a week as you go through the 12 weeks. So, anything to add to all that?
One of the other things that we noticed, which is why we developed this particular talk and way of thinking, is that, especially in my practice, I see people often once a week or once every couple of weeks. And what I started noticing with some people is that they were in chronic discomfort or chronic ill health, and they kept coming for an hour every week or every other week, but not bringing their information home with them and not making any changes to their lifestyle or even their way of thinking about themselves and their bodies, but they just sort of wanted to be taken care of for an hour a week. And again, that's how we started posing the question, well, if health were your first priority, what would you do differently? And so we developed this whole idea of what to bring into your life that, again, is simple, but will make some great changes, and also started to think about why we're not bringing those things into our life automatically.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So the truth is that we could talk about this topic over a whole weekend workshop. It's the subject of a book that we're working on, and so we're going to try to distill it down, and we wanted to definitely make sure that everybody here walks away with some nuggets, some things that you can do. And so we're going to talk a little bit briefly about what it is that models human behavior, why we make the choices that we make, the things that get in our way, how to sort of change those, and then kind of hit some of these things that we can do that you can just start making changes right today.
Right.
So I'm gonna
Yeah. Where do you want to start? Here?
Why don't you make it bigger?
Oh,
Just double click on it. Yeah. Just click through those. Yeah. So, the questions when it comes to priorities and really about health and what your priorities are. First question to ask is, what are your priorities? And if being healthy really isn't a priority, then, ignore the next 50 minutes of what we talked about today.
Right.
And that would make me sad, because I want to see health be a priority for everybody. I really do. And yet, I don't want to dictate that for other people as well. It's a priority for me. It's why I make the choices that I make. And I've experienced being closer to that 10 on that continuum than I ever have before, and closer than many people that I come in contact with during the day. And so, having had that experience, it's something that I want to share with people. So I would put out there that if it isn't your priority, consider making it more of a priority.
And even to just ask yourself the question, I don't know how many times in our lives we actually ask ourselves, what is my priority right now? What is it that I want to focus on and follow through on? And so even just knowing that question is out there and bringing that into your life is a great first step. It's a great start.
Right.
Yeah.
So, what are your priorities? Are you carrying them out? Why are some changes easier to make for you than others? And why is it easier for other people to make some changes than it is for you? All just questions to sort of pose to yourself and to ponder and to wonder about.
Yeah. And to also look at the trajectory in which your life is going. So really look at the movement that your life is taking, and recognize that direction that your life is going in is a result of the priorities that you have, conscious or unconscious. And so right now we're talking about making them a lot more conscious.
And owning them is, and sometimes that's a harder message to get, but owning them. If your health isn't exactly what you want it to be, in some respect, your health is exactly what it is because of the choices that you've made in the past.
Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit.
Yeah, I teach a course at Johns Hopkins that's entitled A Holistic Approach to Anti-Aging, in a program that they have that's called the Odyssey Program. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about is that the development of chronic disease, whether we call it diabetes or blood pressure or whatever, it's actually the body doing exactly what it's supposed to do based on the influences that we're giving that body from the outside world. And so those diseases aren't things that happen to us. Those are diseases that happen because of us. And that's what this is all about, is that if we can understand that concept and be willing to make some changes, we see every day, miraculous changes in the way that people's bodies work. Mm-hmm. I've had people look at me sometimes and say, well, wait a second, you're blaming me for being sick. And I guess you could look at it that way. I prefer to look at it as an empowering statement that says, wow, I don't need anybody else's help to make my health different. I don't need prescription medicines. I don't need the advice of a physician. All I need to do is change some things if I look at my diseases as teachers and I listen, I can make those things change. Okay?
Good.
So, you know, there's one of the questions that when Randy and I were sitting down and talking about this was, to answer was, okay, what is it that really models human behavior? Why do we make the choices that we make? And we've done a lot of research about that. We've done a lot of soul searching about that, a lot of talking to other people to try to understand what that's about. And there's a lot of theories out there. The one that makes the most sense to us, that seems to make sense really, is that we in every one of our choices, we're actually looking for control and we're looking for security. And any choice that anybody makes in any situation ultimately can be boiled down to that. When you make a choice between one thing and another, the reason we choose one versus another is because the one gives us more sense of security and control. And we have a tendency to want to pull other people into that as well. And so we have a tendency to have relationships with people that agree with that point of view and or seem to help us attain that feeling of safety and security and control, right? So why do we behave the way we do? One question to ask is, or thing to understand is that you have to believe that whatever it is that you want to do is humanly possible. If we're talking about changing a behavior, and maybe it's about weight loss, just to take one example, and changing a diet. If someone puts you on a diet and in your head you don't believe that you can actually do it, you won't do it. You just can't. Regardless of how much you know inside of your head that says, I should do this, or exercise. I know I should exercise every day, but I don't. Why not? Some of it is about the belief that you actually can do it, that it's attainable, right? Mm-hmm. Number two? Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Oh, the other one is to believe that you have enough energy to get it done, and that you have the right kind of energy. So, you know, if you think that the only way to improve your physical health is to do something like climb a mountain every weekend or run a marathon, but you know innately that there's no way you can follow through on that, that is a completely unattainable goal and is something that you're not going to follow through on. So having an understanding of your energy level and choosing things, you know, any decisions that you make that are going to be within that energy level are the next piece that's important.
And we'll come back to that concept when we talk about the 6 steps, because one of those things is energy flow practices, things that actually help increase energy so that you have more vital energy to carry out what those goals are. Mm-hmm. So another question to ask yourself are, what are the conflicting needs and beliefs that you have? You have to have the opportunity to participate in these new behaviors, and you have to believe that the opportunity exists. And so if I sit down with somebody, again, weight loss, and I say, look, you have to eat something every 2.5 to 3 hours, and someone says, I don't have the opportunity to do that. You know, I work and I eat breakfast, I go to work, and I don't have a break until 2 in the afternoon. It's just impossible. That behavior is not going to change. Right. Now, part of our challenge is to, one, change the priority, make sure somebody understands that that's a choice that you're making, that there are ways in that and around that, and if that's the choice that you make, the result is going to be that you're telling your body there's no food available. And when you tell your body there's no food available, what does the body do? Slows metabolism down and stores energy, which we call fat. And so that simple thing is a choice that we're making, and there are ways to get around that, and that's part of the strategies that we work with patients every day. So have a protein bar, so that way, regardless of what meeting you're in and regardless of what activity you're in, you can stop and have something to eat to tell your body that's the food available. Now, I can tell you, yesterday we talked about foods being, eating things that come from nature, and you're asking yourself a simple question: does this food exist in nature this way? Well, I've never seen a power bar growing on a tree either, but if the choice is having a power bar, which is a processed food, versus having no food at all, it'd be better to have the power bar, right? Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing is that in order to follow through on something, it has to have set off a trigger in your mind. And the trigger could either be mental, emotional, or physical. So something mental is sort of the realization that you're aging, or the realization that you're not well anymore. Something emotional is potentially seeing a friend who gets sick, or seeing a friend who's actually taking better care of themselves, and so you have that emotional response to that, to understanding and feeling how good that feels, or unfortunately how bad that feels. Or another trigger is physical, like you have an illness, or you've taken a fall, or anything along those lines. So anything like that can trigger us into setting priorities and beginning to follow through on them.
Lots of times when we have a trigger, especially any of those really, they work at first and they make us change behavior at first, and then we slowly get back to those old habits. So I can't tell you how many, this is more about men than women, but I can't tell you how many men, patients that I've seen that somewhere in their 40s or 50s they have a heart attack. And what do? For the next year, they really behave themselves. Their diet changes, their exercise changes, their attitude, how they deal with stress. And then once they get back into that same comfort level that they were before, and a year down the road, they start gaining weight again, they stop exercising, and they go right back to those old habits that led to that heart attack in the first place. So one of the challenges is, how do we create a system or a protocol that will last a lifetime? Mm-hmm. You know, I made a joke about this on Facebook yesterday. I posted on there and I said, properly taken care of, the human body will last a lifetime, which is true for all of us, right? Yeah. But my hope is that lifetime, the quality of life is what we want it to be, and that it ends up being longer than it could be if we made different choices. So. Mm-hmm.
So psychologically, we kind of looked at some parts of our personality that get in the way of us reaching our goals, and we call those saboteurs. And there are 5 major saboteurs, and they include the judge that sits in your mind and judges you all the time. I'm going to go into each one of these in a little more detail. The critic, the failure, the prostitute, and the victim. So let me just tell you a little bit about each one here. The judge is the one, that voice in your mind that asks you, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? That's what the judge says. Anybody not have that voice going on? Mm-hmm. And the judge's voice cuts you down and makes you feel unworthy of change and unworthy of success. All right? So one thing to ask yourself is, whose voice is this? Where did this voice come from? And these saboteurs are actually archetypes, so it's going to be unusual for someone not to have this part of your personality on some occasion at least. The next one is the critic, and the critic is literally that critical voice. You don't look good enough, you haven't lost enough weight, you're not getting enough sleep, you're too tense. It's that voice in your head that's telling you what you're not enough of all the time. And again, wants to make sure that you believe that you're not good enough. Okay? All right. The next voice is the failure. The failure is that voice that says, ugh, what's the point? I'm never going to be successful at this anyway. It cuts you down before you even start. It makes sure that you don't even begin your process, because it tells you that there's no way you can succeed anyway.
And you might have, past experience with that. We all have. We've all taken on projects where we were, and then it didn't turn out the way we thought it should, or we didn't follow through the way we should. So, why even bother? We know we're just going to fail anyway.
Right. And so the point with the failure voice in your head is to just start thinking smaller. It's not about starting today knowing that you're going to run the marathon, but it's about saying, okay, well, how am I going to start getting in shape today? Nobody knows how to get from A to Z in one step. Nobody can do that, and that's a completely overwhelming task. The idea is to say, okay, I start at A, what is step B? That's all I need to know, is what is the next step? And once I'm there, then I'll know what the next step is after that. So you're keeping your goals fairly small and easily attainable.
That's what that holistic health class is all about as well, because Absolutely. It's just one small step at a time, and by the time you go through the 12 weeks, you can be a completely different person.
Every time he says that, I keep thinking, who am I going to be? I don't know. Okay, so the fourth one is the prostitute voice, and the prostitute, interestingly enough, is the voice that asks us to sell our soul in order to receive anything that we need. So for instance, the prostitute voice might say, my partner won't love me if I'm healthier than him or her, or I won't be taken care of if I'm healthy. No one will feel sorry for me anymore. So this is the idea that we're using our health or any part of our life that isn't working quite right in order to receive love. So, you know, it can be scary to think that if we make major changes in our lives, that we're still going to get the affection, the love, the attention, the honor, whatever it is that we've been getting.
Or to even just get along with our mates or whoever. I mean,
Yeah.
I certainly have had experience where getting on a new regimen has caused strife in a relationship. Maybe it's at work, you know. Maybe if I really say, look, I'm going to get my exercise every day, or I'm going to eat the way I'm supposed to, and it means that in the middle of a meeting I'm going to take 5 minutes to go eat a bar, that, you know, there's tension around that, and there's judgment around that as
Yeah.
well.
And on an even bigger scale, you know, there are some, I work with some young women, early 20s, and part of the culture is to drink on weekends, you know, go out and have a good time and drink alcohol. And I've had some people say to me, you know I feel awful the next day. I know it's having an effect on my levels of depression or anxiety, but how do I go out with my friends and not join them? How do I not drink? So that's part of that resistance to change. Okay, and then lastly, the victim. And the victim's the one who says, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough money, I don't have enough energy, I don't have enough support. It's the part of you that feels like, oh, you know, it's just not going to work, and everybody else has it, but I don't, and I just have to step back. So it you know, assumes that whatever your resistance is somebody else's fault or something else's fault. Not taking on the responsibility for yourself of saying, okay, if I don't have enough money to do X, how can I do it differently? If I don't have enough energy, what do I have enough energy to do? You know, how do I increase my energy?
One of the subtle ways that I find people are victims has to do with that genetic thing I was talking about yesterday. My parents gave me these crappy genes, and that's why I'm sick. That's why I have this challenge or that challenge, and we can really even overcome that.
Right. And so we want to start thinking about how our thoughts affect our physical bodies and create blocks in our bodies. And know that negativity is really an energy. And there is no separation between our thoughts and our physical body, none at all. Our physical body is a manifestation of how we think, okay? And so it's a manifestation of our belief systems. So we want to take a good look at our belief systems and understand that when we hold underlying negativity about things, including all these 5 saboteurs, including maybe other ways that we're thinking negatively consistently, whether it's judging other people or having unrealistic expectations of things and then being upset about them, having beliefs in lack, all these different things, they create blocks of energy in the body, which ultimately eventually create ill health on some level or another.
Maybe another way to state that same thing is that every cell in your body eavesdrops on what's going on in between your ears. So just the bottom line.
Right.
There's a communication network that happens on an energetic level. So your immune system is affected by what's going on in between your ears. And to some level, we all know this and understand this. And we've actually seen this happen remotely. Every one of us have had the experience where you've been at a party or a gathering and someone walks in the room and instantly the mood of the whole room changes, either in a negative or a positive way. You know, the life of the party walks in and everybody's all anticipating, or, you know, the sourpuss walks in and everybody just goes like that. And the same thing happens with every cell in our body. And cells can't function the way they're supposed to. They can't talk to each other. They can't carry out their mission to 100% optimal, you know, function.
With negativity, yeah, right, exactly, right. The negative thoughts also create blocks in our energy field. You know, our energy field is within, through, and around our entire physical body. We're so much more than just what we can see with the physical eye. And we're so connected to everybody else, we're connected to the planet, our energy is never ending, completely infinite, and 100% connected to everything around us. And so negativity, whether we're picking it up from the outside, whether we've got our own family beliefs that we've, continued, whatever it is creating dissonance within the energy field. And again, that dissonance eventually creates opportunity for disease or illness.
I'm just curious to ask a question or to a show of hands. Who in this room believes that? Show of hands.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And some people don't. and so, our scientific world doesn't, it teaches us to only trust our five senses, and what we don't sense must not exist. And there's always a simple analogy that I like to ask people about. There is such a thing as the wind, right? Have you ever seen it? No. You actually don't see wind. Now, you can see the results of wind, right? You can see a branch going like this in the wind, and that's the result of it. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we might not see the energy phenomenon that's happening around us and happening inside of us, but we see the results. We just don't equate the two. We don't attribute the results to the imbalances of energy. But there are many of us in the holistic world that believe that any physical ailment that you have is preceded by an energetic anomaly.
Or dissonance, right, exactly. Does anyone have any questions about any of that before we start talking about actually positive things?
I do
Yeah.
have a question. What about kids and kids being sick because they haven't been here for like 30, 40 years?
Right.
Right.
And so how come they have this disease if they're, only been like 5 years?
Yeah.
Less?
Right.
That can often be a pretty metaphysical question, very spiritual question. I mean, as much as we have the ability to create our own reality, we also come in with certain karma and soul missions and contracts and things like that. That's kind of on a bigger level. And so why do people get sick? I mean, it's part of it as well. Like, what are the children carrying in? Not physically necessarily, but what are they here to do and experience? And everybody is here to experience something specific for themselves, So that's the spiritual answer. And certainly the physical answer could be environmental issues, that they're put in situations where they're picking up a lot of negativity in their family, or that they've, sort of had imbalances or sensitivities in their system from birth or from anything that they've experienced physically when they're in, where they live and things
The other
like
point of that, just to speak to the physical world, is that actually studies have shown that what generations before have done with their diet, exercise, and lifestyle affects offspring. There were studies that were done with animals, with cats and dogs, where they started feeding them a processed and refined food diet instead of a raw food diet. And what they found is that within the third or fourth generation, the youngins of those grandmothers and grandfathers who changed their diet had completely different genetic sets and different genetic tendencies towards such and such. And so you started seeing birth defects, you started seeing tendencies towards chronic disease that the grandparents didn't even necessarily have. So that also can be an explanation of it, Mm-hmm. And again, not a big fan of being the victim or thinking of it that way, but the truth is that, my kids and their health was affected by my parents, sitting around eating TV dinners. I mean, it's just the bottom line. And it's interesting because if you look at the advent of sort of a processed and refined food diet, we're about the third generation, in our culture, in our society. And I think that's part of why we see things like that.
Right. And a lot of ADD and ADHD, that's all part of it as well. Yeah.
Deficiencies in essential fatty acids and healthy fats in mom show up in the child in a lot of different ways. So. Hopefully we skated around that difficult question.
Yeah, in Hinduism it is believed that each person is given a certain energy pack, and that pack gets
Right?
Very interesting.
Yeah,
Very interesting.
makes
Wanna
perfect sense.
repeat that for the.
No, you can.
Okay. I'm going to try to repeat that for the
Just-
camera.
Just because the microphones don't pick up what you guys say.
So correct me if I get this wrong. But in Hinduism, the idea is that every person is born with a certain energy pack, and that we do not have the capability of measuring that pack, but that's why we have time. And so we can see that depletion of energy over time. So say a person dies at age 68, the idea is that the energy is just depleted to zero. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah. And my belief is that as time goes on and our microscopes get finer, that we will be able to measure those things. We measure things today that we couldn't measure 20 years ago or 200 years ago. And many of the things that science is finding today is supporting scientifically beliefs that are 5,000 years old.
Yeah.
And I believe that will continue as well. So
Right.
at some point we actually will be able to measure those things.
Yeah, come back next year and we'll do a whole talk on spirituality and the physical.
So,
Okay.
so let's hit some practical steps that everybody can take right now, today. You want to?
Go for it.
So I wrote them up here, and these are the 6 steps to begin to make your health, let me just, your first priority. And so number 1 is to understand what motivates you. And really, we talked about that a little bit, but what is it that you can use to be that constant trigger of change? Is it the health thing like it is for me and like I talk about, or is it, your looks? Is it competition? At the gym, like you guys have here at our building in Hunt Valley, they do a Biggest Losers competition every year. And, because it's the competition thing. And some people, that's what motivates them, beating somebody else. That's why we do competitive sports. And so if that's part of your nature and what, how you're wired, you can make use of that, right? Which means that you want to set up a competition group. I mean, if the goal is to be healthiest or to lose, the most weight or be able to do whatever, we all know that when we do it in a group, there are days that we wake up, we don't feel like doing it. Someone else will help pull us through, and we'll help pull other people through as well. Guilt, we have a tendency to think of that as kind of a negative thing. Lots of times that's what changes behavior, at least initially. That heart attack thing, we get scared, we think about, oh, geez, we're going to leave our family, and we can't do that, and so we guilt ourselves into being healthier. That one doesn't have a tendency to last real long.
That one's not the most efficient but or effective, but can at least get you started. A lot of people come in and say, I'm here to quit smoking. Okay, well, what's the priority? My wife sent me. It's like, oh,
Right.
Okay, well, that doesn't work well, but
Right.
at least it brings the awareness up to the front.
Right. I don't know, is that a good, guys, anyways? Is that a good motivating factor to just get your wife to stop talking? No? Doesn't work for a while. Doesn't work. So, okay.
Yeah, it doesn't.
No. Okay, so number 2 is diet. And this is what and this is the way I like to explain it, and I like to look at things, I talked about this a little bit yesterday also, in a bigger sort of global perspective. And so, as species on this planet, we sort of develop genetically and modify our genes to live within our environment. It's called natural selection. And the truth is that for the tens of thousands of years that we've been on this planet, having grains as a staple in our diet is a relatively new phenomenon. And it may be that somewhere in the future that will be more acceptable to us genetically, but right now we're not geared to handle it. And so biochemically, when we have all of those grains which quickly turn to sugar, which cause the body to release insulin in levels that we're not designed to have, it causes physiological changes. And if I were to point to one simple fact that has led to most of the chronic diseases that we have in industrialized society, it's because of the prevalence of grains in our diet. There's a lot of information on there about that. There's a book out there written by a guy named Joseph Mercola, which is called Going Against the Grain. And he really sort of lays this out for you. And the paleo diet right now is sort of a popular thing. And it's this idea, moving back to a diet that we were exposed to for the vast majority of the time that we've been here. Does that make sense? Yeah? And if you've never had that experience, again, don't make it a lifetime sentence. Just take a period of time and take grains out of your diet completely. All of it. Bread, pasta, cereal, grains at all. Just take them out of your diet for a period of time and see what happens. Make no other change if you just want to do an experiment and see what happens. and see if your immune system doesn't work better, your hormonal system doesn't work better, that you're sleeping differently, that your mood is different, that you lose a pound or two, that your body works in completely different ways as far as digestion and elimination. I mean, it really is quite amazing. Questions? Yeah?
Well, my natural reaction is, but evolutionarily back then, we had a lifespan of 25 years.
Good question. So I don't know if everybody heard that. He said, but evolutionarily, we had a lifespan of 25 years. Not sure that's necessarily true. A little bit of an exaggeration, but I understand what you're saying. But the point is that the lifespan difference didn't have to do with chronic disease. It had to do with saber-toothed tigers and, you know, the environment that we lived in, and as well as hygiene issues as we started to be more civilized, right? You know, it's really interesting. We look to our longevity today as an indication that our health is actually better. Our longevity today is related to two simple things, hygiene and better emergency services. You know, we point to less people dying from heart attacks today, and that is true, but more people are having heart attacks than have ever had before. And it's because of those emergency sort of procedures that we've been able to develop. And so it's a little bit of a, I don't want to say a fallacy, but it's a little bit of a skewing of the statistics when we say, oh, we live longer today than we did. I mean, we do, but there's different reasons why. How about the quality of life, though? You know, how many of us live to 80, but the last 20 years of our life are not that enjoyable? You know, body doesn't function the way it should. Okay, anything to add to that about the diet?
Nope.
Okay, so the third thing I wrote up there is the essential six, and I actually did a whole talk about this last time I was out here. I did a webinar about this, and so on our website there you can actually go and listen to this in much more detail. But the essential six started from people asking me personally, hey, what are the supplements that you take? I used to do a radio show, and I used to get, you know, we used to talk about everything, and then people would call and say, well, what is it that you take? The implication being that, you know, if I'm the guy that knows, the things that I take must be the really important things. And so when I actually started to distill it and look at the things, these are the 6 supplements that I think that every one of us should be on every day for very specific reasons. So again, many of these I've done webinars about just those individual things. So the truth is I could talk for 2 hours about each one of these things, but I'm just going to go blow through them real quickly. So number 1 is fish oil. These healthy fats play such an important role with balancing your body's inflammatory response and helping cells communicate with each other. In the short story is that what nature intended us to get was a balance between fats that lead to inflammation, pro-inflammatory fats, and fats that work against inflammation, anti-inflammatory fats. And what nature intended for us, and what was the truth probably until 100, 150 years ago, was anywhere from a 1-to-1 to a 2-to-1 ratio of pro to anti-inflammatory fats. We're way out of balance today. Standard American diet, anywhere from 15 to 30 to 1. And so fish oil are these pro-inflammatory fats. They help balance that. So the analogy is that if anti-inflammatory, so they help balance that. Sorry, thank you. So the analogy is that from an inflammatory perspective, if you lit a match and you wanted to put it out, you could just blow it out, or if you want, you could call the fire department. The fire department will come put that match out for you. That's what we do in our bodies, and that's why we have such a problem with inflammation. Allergies would be an example of that. You get exposure to a minor trigger, the body calls the fire department, and that's why you get all those symptoms that you get. That's just a small example. So fish oil plays a very important role with balancing that. Yeah. What about eating fish? And so these healthy fats come from cold water fish, salmon, tuna, that kind of thing, mackerel. The problem with eating fish is, number 1, they are a source of lead and mercury and PCBs and other things. It doesn't matter where those fish come from. Fish coming from the pristine waters of Alaska still show that they have those things. And so eating smaller fish that are lower on the food chain can eliminate those exposures. So eating sardines is healthier for you than eating salmon that eat a whole bunch of sardines and other fish, right? Number 2 is, and then if the fish is farmed, they don't feed it the way it would eat in nature. They actually feed it, Purina salmon chow or whatever, and it actually changes the mixture of its fats. And so what we're finding is that in farmed fish, you don't get that 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio. You actually are getting the same thing that we already have in our diet. So number two is that when you're in a deficiency state, which every one of us are with healthy fats, it's really hard to make it up from your diet alone. You couldn't eat enough fish to get enough of the healthy fats to do it. That's why, sadly, you have to supplement with it.
Is there any other source of those healthy fats, like does flax do the same thing?
Right. So she asked, are there any other sources of these healthy fats that are, I guess, non-animal for vegetarians or whatever?
Well, I guess I'm just thinking, if you think like millions of years ago, what about people that didn't live near cold water fish? How did they
Right.
get these?
Right. So what she said was that she was thinking about, well, a million years ago, what about people that didn't live near, cold water fish? Actually, nobody lived that way. People always live near water. Now, we may have moved at times, but for the most part, we always live near water. That's part of the difference that we do today as well. And it's the deficiency state. Back then, it was a staple in our diet one way or another, and our needs for those healthy fats are different than they are today. We didn't have as many inflammatory triggers, and so the need is higher. So there are vegetable sources. Flax oil is one of those sources, but the oils that or the fats that your body needs are called EPA and DHA. Those are the major ones. And what you get from vegetable sources is called ALA. It's a different fat, and the body has to convert it into EPA and DHA. People, as we age and as we have our fats unbalanced, have a harder time doing that conversion. And so clinically, what I find is that using flax oil does not give us the same results as fish oil. You had a question?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the EPA and DHA because that's what my question is. I've heard that unless the combination of those two elements do not equal 1,000, you're wasting your money.
You're saying as far as the amount that you're taking?
Right.
So if I'm just looking, what she asked was the amounts of EPA and DHA, and that if you're not getting at least a combination of 1,000, you're wasting your money. My clinical perspective is that you're short on what you're saying. Generally speaking, I want people to get 1,800 milligrams of EPA and 1,200 milligrams of DHA every day. 1,800 and 1,200. Now, there's one exception to that rule. There's a product by a company called New Chapter called Whole-Mega, and they do not concentrate to just EPA and DHA. So when you look at the label, it has a full array of 16 or 17 different healthy fats. So it has lower doses of EPA and DHA, but it's in a form that the body uses much more efficiently. And so 4 of those capsules a day generally clinically do the trick, but if you looked at the amount of EPA and DHA, it would look like it was a subclinical amount. Some fish oil that you can get from Sam's Club or whatever, a big tub of fish oil for $9.95 or whatever, you have to look and see what the concentration is. Usually they're 180 and 120, which means you'd have to take 10 of those a day to get that dosage. So a higher potency one is a better way to go. All right.
How about eating nuts, like almonds or?
They have good fats in them. Some of those fats are pro-inflammatory. They're not the EPA and DHA, and they just need to be balanced. So I'm a fan of having plenty of nuts and avocado and olive oil and that kind of stuff in the diet, and it needs to be balanced with these particular fats. Okay. So, and I'm going to try to blow through these because we have some other things, and I apologize for that. I know that there's information. The rest of the 6 are vitamin D. Vitamin D. The quick story is that again, for the vast majority of the time that we've been on the planet, we did not live indoors. And we got exposure to the sun all the time, and our vitamin D levels were much higher. When you use vitamin D, you want to use vitamin D3, which is the natural D. And vitamin D controls about 2,500 different genes on the human genome. It is a real regulator of genetic expression. And none of us get enough of it. This time of year, you should be taking 5,000 units a day. Rule of thumb about whether your exposure to the sun is making vitamin D is look at your shadow. If your shadow is longer than you are, you're not making any vitamin D. The sun is too low in the sky. There's not one time during the day in Colorado, probably between, late September and June, that your shadow is not longer than you are. The sun is too low in the sky. And so we just don't make as much vitamin D as we used to. Probiotics, good bacteria. There's a whole world that lives within your gut. I just did a webinar about this last month, and again, it's on the website that you can go and listen to 45 minutes of just talking about this, but there's a whole world that lives in here, and when that world gets imbalanced, immune system can't work properly, elimination can't work properly, digestion can't work properly. And so taking a good probiotic, a good bacteria formula every day. What you get from Activa is not nearly enough, and it's entirely too much sugar and calories without getting enough of the good bacteria. Digestive enzymes, same story. We eat a processed and refined food diet, and that means they're enzyme poor. And so when we eat those foods, we're asking our body to do too much work on digestion. And so by taking a digestive enzyme every time you eat, you're sort of replenishing, putting back into the food the good bacteria, the enzymes that help break those foods down more completely. Papaya, it would be one enzyme to break down proteins. It's a protease, but it's not nearly as complete as it should be. And the issue here is that, you know, our challenge with digestion is to take something from the outside world, break it down into its smallest parts, absorb, and then use those parts to regenerate and rebuild. And so we want a plant-based digestive enzyme that goes across the board, that have proteases that break down proteins. Now, proteases can be active in different pH ranges, and so as you go through your digestive tract, pH goes from acidic to more neutral. And so there are proteases that are active in, you know, 4.5 pH and a 5.8 pH and a 6.2 pH. And so a properly formulated product will have proteases that are active in all of those ranges, and then also the proteins that break down sugars and fats and carbohydrates and all of that stuff. Should be plant-based. You don't want to use a pancreatic enzyme. Your pancreas makes enzymes that helps with digestion. If you put those enzymes in from the outside world, you're constantly down-regulating the pancreas doing its job. You're constantly getting the message to the pancreas, there's enzymes already here, don't make any more. When you use plant-based digestive enzymes, you're not monkeying with the pancreas doing its job.
Can you do the same thing by just eating more raw food, uncooked food?
Yes. She asked if you could do the same thing by eating more raw food. Yes. If you eat an apple, the apple has enzymes in it to break it down. That's why if you cut an apple and leave it on the table for half a day, it'll start to break down. That's why aged beef is more tender, because the enzymes that are in the beef have already started to break those protein bonds down. So eating more of a raw food diet is one way to combat that, but it's not necessarily practical for us, especially in the proteins. Unless you're eating sushi, we generally don't eat raw proteins, right? Anti-inflammatory herbs, again, inflammation is one of those underpinnings of every chronic disease. And so herbs like turmeric and ginger or boswellia, it's a whole bunch of different ones. And so the idea of taking an aspirin every day, actually taking anti-inflammatory herbs every day, actually does something for you in helping to avoid disease. And then the last thing is adrenal support, and that has to do with stress and the stresses that we're exposed to. One of the key things that makes genes express themselves in a negative way versus a positive way is stress and how your body's responding to stress. And so putting some attention to the adrenals herbally, there's a group of herbs that are known as adaptogens. You've heard of some of them, ginseng, licorice, maybe other ones, maybe not, like ashwagandha, schizandra, arctic roots, a whole bunch of different ones. They have a tendency to grow, interestingly enough, in areas where it is stressful to live in. Like Siberia, like the cold environments, and that's sort of nature's remedy.
China.
Yeah, right, exactly. So that's the essential six. Can you talk a little bit about exercise?
Yeah, I want to talk about exercise because now I'm sure I'm talking to you guys in Colorado. This is probably not as much of an issue as it might be in Baltimore, but I just want to remind you that just like we talked about the history of our diet, I also want to talk about the history of movement, which is that historically, before the industrial era, we moved all the time. We were outside, we were bending, we were sitting, we were crouching, we were, we had a very much more active lifestyle. And this lifestyle was sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day. Our body hasn't really built up any sort of way to manage that. And so we want to keep our muscles toned, we want to keep our skeleton aligned, and we want to keep our heart working, our circulatory system. So including some sort of exercise or movement, and that means, it doesn't have to be a huge deal. It doesn't even have to mean getting to the fitness center here for an hour a day. It could mean, it could just mean that every hour or two you get up from your desk and walk up and down the stairs. Anything to add movement to your day is important.
Can I
Yes,
say something
please.
about that?
Sure.
So, and again, going back to caveman times, the kind of exercise that we've always gotten are quick bursts of intense exercise surrounded by periods of less intense exercise. So the the term that we would use for that today in modern times is interval training, and that's really the way that we should exercise. I was telling Andy yesterday that, has anyone here heard about the thing that's called a runner's high? So you go out and you run for 5 or 6 miles and you get what we call a second wind, and it's actually it's a release of endorphins, and we get another energy spurt from that. Let me tell you what the runner's high really is, okay? You're a caveman and a saber-toothed tiger is chasing you, and you've run for 6 miles and you're still running, which is, it basically is telling your body that is not stopping, and that rush of endorphins is actually just a little preparation for the end. It's the body just preparing you to get mauled. We were not designed to go out and have exercise for an extended period of time at the same level. The healthiest way that you can exercise is to do activities that cause your heart rate and your blood pressure to go up and down within the exercise regimen. So, and it's usually, you try to shoot for about a 3-to-1 ratio. So here's the equivalent. If you were on a track and you were running, you would sprint the long of the track, and then you would jog the other 3/4 of it, and then you would sprint, and then you would jog. You can do that on any machine. You can do that with any sort of activity that you want to do, whether it's a rower or a stair stepper or if you like to dance. It doesn't matter. It's just blow the doors off for 30 seconds and then calmer for 90 seconds. There's an exercise regimen that we highly recommend that's called Peak 8, and you can just do a Google search for it, and you'll get it takes around 24-25 minutes. You do it 3 times a week. It makes a huge difference in your building of muscle, your creating of a growth hormone, which then becomes fat targeting.
Right, increases your metabolism quickly. Okay. And then I want to talk about breathing, because breathing is one of those things that obviously is automatic in the body, but we don't always do it, actually. And in our culture, due to high stress, we've learned how to breathe very shallowly and very quickly. And so a lot of times, especially when we're under stress and we live that way, we're breathing quickly in and we're not really ever breathing out. We're not ever relaxing the muscles enough so that the breath is completely moving out. So we want to learn how to breathe again, quite honestly. And if you don't take a lot of yoga or Tai Chi or anything like that, you might have gotten really out of practice with even checking in to see if you're breathing. So ideally, the breath wants to move throughout the entire torso. You want to be able to breathe as low down as your hips and as high up as your shoulders, and get an entire breath into your body, and then breathe it all out. And that takes a little time. One of the quick and easy ways to learn breathing is to practice inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 4 counts, and exhaling for 4 counts. And yawning is perfect because it's getting more oxygen into your body. It's telling you that your body needs even more than you're getting. And so relearning the act of breathing is vitally important to our health. It's also the way that we interact with our environment. I mean, our breath is literally our life force energy. And so we want to be conscious of how we are taking in that life force energy and using it in the body. Slower breathing is more healthy. Every animal on the planet that breathes more slowly lives a longer life. The animals like birds that breathe really quickly and their heart rates are really fast live a much shorter lifespan than something like an elephant that breathes, once every 3 minutes. So the idea of slowing down the breath, making it very full in the body, exhaling completely, these are all things that are going to affect physical health as well as mental emotional health. It's going to affect our metabolism, it affects our stress level, it affects our attitudes and moods. What else?
Toxin levels?
Toxin levels. Every exhalation, as you exhale carbon dioxide, it's also moving and releasing toxins from your body.
So here's an exercise to try right now. Just put your hand on your belly and take a slow, deep breath in. And tell me what happens to your hand. If your hand went in, you're chest breathing, you're not diaphragm breathing. Your hand should go out. When you take a breath in, your diaphragm should be pulled down and your gut should go out. And you can even force yourself to do it to experience that. Look at a baby while he's laying down breathing, and you'll see that's exactly what happens. Mm-hmm. But what do? We have a tendency to breathe emotionally, right? Now, everybody here knows and understands that your emotions can affect your breathing. If you're upset, you breathe differently. If you're scared, you breathe differently. What we don't commonly understand is that the opposite is true. You want to change your emotion, change your breath. If you feel scared, like, you know, if you're nervous about doing a presentation, what do they say? Take a deep
Some
breath,
deep breaths.
right? And when you take that belly breath properly, it actually changes biochemically what's going on in here and here and everywhere. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
It signals to the brain that everything's fine. The quick, sharp breath signals to the brain that there's a threat. It's like, okay, something's wrong. Something's wrong. Okay, we need to move quickly or you know, get ready to fight. That's the fight or flight syndrome.
Yeah.
Slow, deep, even breaths signal to the body that there's nothing wrong, there's no threat, life is fine, and everything in your body can start responding much more easily, much more efficiently. All the systems in your body work better when you're breathing. And then finally, the last thing we wanted to talk about are practices that you can do to increase your energy and stimulate your breath. And we're really looking at the ones not so much as exercise, but as like qi movements, qi exercises. And those include yoga, tai chi, qigong, acupuncture, Reiki, and any other kinds of body work that stimulates the skin or the energy system. Anything else? you
Yeah.
can think of?
So, is everybody familiar with that term qi? So, it's basically the term for the energy that animates us.
Life force energy.
Life
right,
force
exactly.
energy, yeah. And so, you guys, we have a big health fair tomorrow, right? Hopefully, everybody's going to come. On Friday, there is a Reiki practitioner that people have signed up for to do little 15-minute Reiki experiences with. If you've never experienced it, I'd recommend it. My understanding is that the schedule between 10 and 2 filled up immediately with the one practitioner. And so Randy and I are both Reiki practitioners, and so we're kind of throwing our rings and our hat into the ring as well. And so if you get in touch with Jaden down at the health center, there's some more times that are available between 10 and 12 on Friday if you want to come experience that and see what that does to your energy throughout the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Questions?
Yeah, any other questions?
No? Wow. Well, thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
Back to probiotics.
Yeah.
Sure.
Can you comment on Greek yogurt?
Right. So he asked about probiotics and Greek yogurt. There are literally trillions of bacteria that should be in here, and when we take a supplement, it can have billions of bacteria in it. My favorite one to use clinically is one that has 30 billion bacteria per capsule. When we use food sources, which can be yogurt, which can be any fermented food, sauerkraut. I had one guy in the audience when I did a talk last week, and he said, beer? I said, yes, beer has probiotics in it as well. Of course, it has alcohol in it that makes it harder for the probiotics to live. But so any of the food sources do not have the amount of bacteria that you need to change an imbalance. So eating fermented foods is a good idea to help maintain this, but if there is an imbalance, and there's many factors from the outside world that cause that imbalance. Who in here has taken an antibiotic over the past 2 weeks? A couple people. Who in here has had beef, chicken, or tap water in the past 2 weeks? Right, so you get antibiotics for those things as well, and those are all negative influences on the good bacteria. And so any of the yogurts don't have enough. Of the yogurts, I like the Greek ones the best. You have to watch the sugar content of those, though. And so having a good Greek yogurt, what's the brand? Chobani is a good brand.
Chobani and Oikos.
And if you use their unflavored or vanilla or honey, those are good ones. The ones that have fruit have a lot of too much sugar in them. Yeah. Any other questions? So thanks. Good. Hopefully we'll see everybody here tomorrow for the health fair. Yeah? Cool.
Thank you. I know there's some people who came in a little bit after and didn't get these, so if you have an interest,